Hello again, Fish-a-lots. The Wacky rig has got to be one of the best lures and setups on the planet for catching fish. In this video, we're going to cover everything you need to know and why this is such a fish catching machine. This is going to be the only Wacky rig video that you will ever need. So let's get to demystifying the Wacky rig. All right, so first and foremost, let's talk about the worm itself. This is, after all, what the bass is going to ingest in its mouth, and there's lots and lots of different worms out there that could get pretty confusing, right? You got the good old Yumdinger, you got the Bass Pro Shop Sticko, you got Robo worms, you got Zoom trick worms, and of course, you got the super famous, super awesome Gary Yamamoto Senkos right here. Now, there is a ton of worms, right? You got the Berkeley General, you got the striking KVD worms. There's all sorts of different worms out there, and these are all going to do a little bit different things, which we're going to cover in greater detail. But at the end of the day, you're really talking about two types of worms that you're going to use for Wacky rig fishing. That's going to be a stick bait, which is right here. This is like the Gary Yamamoto Senko. Actually, this is a Gary Yamamoto Senko. And then, of course, a trick style worm that you see right here. This particular one is a Robo worm. All right, and so now that we covered the two types of worms that we're going to use on our Wacky rigs, let's talk about when each type of worm is really going to excel and when you should look for one over another potentially. And so this is a trick style worm like we talked about before. You could tell it's much thinner in diameter. It's not going to displace as much water. So with this worm, I would recommend using this in good water visibility, maybe water visibility over 4 feet, very calm skies, no wind, plenty of light penetration. These lures, because of their thinner diameter, are going to look a little bit more natural. Now, for something like this, a big old stick bait, I'm going to use this with water visibility under 4 feet. The lakes I fish at, honestly, a lot of times 2 to 3 feet. Many times it's under 3 feet of water visibility. It's a bigger profile. It's going to displace a lot more water, which means those fish are going to be honed in, are going to be able to better hone in on this much beefier, thicker bait. I'll use this when it's cloudy out, when it's windy out, when you have rougher conditions, and when I need those fish to detect my bait a lot better than if I'm fishing in perfect conditions where it's nice, it's calm, and I have clear water. So that's kind of a quick breakdown of when I look to use each type of worm for my Wacky rigs. So now let's take a look at all those companies that I just discussed, because each company's worm behaves a little bit differently and has some different properties to it that is really going to make a difference on how these lures work in the water column to trigger bites and how you should be selecting them. So I'll get into that right now. So first, let's start with everybody's favorite, and that is the Yamamoto Senko. Now, the Yamamoto Senko is a beefy bait, right? It is a stick bait, and it is heavily, heavily salted. So right here on the packaging, it says, get salty. And so what that means is that these baits are going to sink very quickly in the water column. And again, the advantage for me is I'm typically fishing in cloudier water, so the bigger bait has its advantage, but since it sinks so well, it actually gets me to depth so that I can fish a lot of different strike zones for those fish with a Wacky rig. Now, I will cover the different retrieves here in a moment, but the fact that these things sink very, very well is a huge advantage if you're looking for fish in deeper water. So now the Yumdingers are not as heavily salted as the Senkos, right? So Yum is a company, their version of this bait is called the Dinger, hence Yumdinger. And the fact that it's not as heavily salted means that these things are really gonna want to float. So whereas I'm gonna look to fish that Senko in some deeper water, this Yumdinger, which again has pretty much the exact same profile as that Senko, it's just not going to get down as well. And so this bait I'm going to look to fish a lot shallower water, or when those fish are higher in the water column and that strike zone is just under the water. So these would be great for that. So you can already tell just between the two companies, you would make your selection on worms a lot differently depending where you're looking to catch these fish. And all right, so sticking with the stick baits, let's talk about the Bass Pro Shop Sticko right here. It's very, very similar to the Senko. This is probably going to be your most similar lure to a Senko out there. It sinks just as good as a Senko. It's very heavily salted. It's got a very similar profile. The only difference here is the price. This is a pack of 16 in there. Senko's only come in a pack of 10. This is about $5.45 at the time of filming this, and the Senko comes in at about $7.60, $7.65, almost $8. So the price difference is a lot considering you're getting 16 worms in this one, only 10 worms in the Senko. Bass Pro Shop also sells these in packs of 30 for $10, which is awesome. Again, if you want to get down in the water column and not kill the bank, this could be a really good option for you. I just want to throw that out there. Now, another stick bait that we talked about was the Berkley General. That's also a very good one. I don't think it sinks as much as a Senko or those Sticko baits, but it doesn't want to float nearly as much as those Yumdingers. So the General's kind of in the middle there. An advantage of the Berkley General is, of course, it's got that Berkley scent that they just pack in those baits. So the additional benefit there is, yes, it is salted. It's not as much salted as a Senko, but it's got that scent in there. So if you like that, and that's going to trigger you some more bites, which honestly sometimes it does, that could be a good option for you too. And so next up, of course, you got your Robo Worm right here. These ones are not nearly as salted as a Senko. These are going to want to float as well. Pretty similar to the Yumdinger. And also you got your Zoom Trick Worms right here. These guys are going to want to float. So again, these type of baits are going to be really ideal. Now, these are the Trick Worm style baits. So if you have very clear water, you have fish in very shallow water where you're not looking to get this at depth, this could be a great option for you because the fish are going to see this a little bit better. So it's going to look a little more natural. And these are the Trick Worm style baits right here. But these guys are also going to want to float. Now, you guys know me with Fishing with Johnny Fish a lot. I just love giving you extra tips out there. So one of the extra tips before we even get into these worms is no matter what worm you're using, when you take it out of the box, just start mashing it up in your fingers, right? Like really mash it, rough it up, break up that salt, break up that color in the worm, and you're gonna see a huge difference in the colors of the worm. So this is a worm that I was just roughing up just with my hands. And then this is going to be a brand new worm right here. And you can kind of see the difference between the two colors. So I'll lay them side by side right there, and you can kind of tell the salt is breaking up in this one, the colors are kind of running a little bit in this one. It just makes it far more natural rather than just a factory colored bait when you really mash them up, rough them up, and give them a more natural look to them, to those fish. This is one I roughed up, and this is one straight out of the packaging. And all right, so as promised, what I want to do here is I want to just show you how to properly use these O-rings. A lot of folks out there, they'll use an O-ring, but they'll actually use it the wrong way and rig this worm up wrong, and it's going to cost you a lot of fish. So there is a very simple trick in order to fix this, and I'm going to show it to you right now. So first and foremost, let's move this out of the way here a little bit. So first what you're going to do is you're going to use a little like ring tool right here. These are super cheap. You know, you get them on Amazon. Don't worry about it. I'll put everything that we're using today in the link in the description below so you guys could easily find it. But what typically happens is folks will take one ring, okay, just like that. And what you do is you slide it down the little pipe right there. You take your worm, you stick this into the ring, okay? You want to get it about halfway down the worm. Again, it's not an exact science. They'll slap it on the worm just like that. That's about halfway. Then they'll take their hook, all right? And now what they'll do is they'll pass this hook through the ring like so. Don't want to hook the worm, want to hook the ring, like so. There you go. And that will be what they think is a good wacky rig right there. And this is a huge, huge mistake because the hook right now, as you can see, is perpendicular to the worm. What you really want it is you want it at a 90-degree angle of the worm like that. Remember, this worm is going to fall in the water column like this, and as it falls, it has this nice little flutter. If the worm is falling like this, straight down, up and down, it's just not going to have that same action, and that's exactly what's going to happen if you hook it up like that, and the hook right here, as you can see, is perfectly straight in line with the worm. That is a no-go. So what I do, and this is your simple trick, you take your rigging tool. Again, I'm going to move this out of the way just so you can see it. Take your rigging tool, take your O-ring, slide it on down, just like that. Now, you don't even need to have this hook in there, so you can remove this hook, all right? And now what you're going to do is you're going to do the same exact thing, put the worm in, but now what you're going to do is you're going to want to crisscross two O-rings right here, right? So I kind of put this on an angle, just like that, just to make my life easier, and there you go. As you slide it on, this thing crisscrosses, and it should look exactly like that. You should have an X right here. And that's pretty much what you got right there. So let me put that down so you can see it. You got this perfect X, and now you take your hook, and you just place it hopefully you guys could see this. You just place it in between the X right there. So you can see this is a perfect X right here and here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the point of the hook and I'm going to put it in one side of the X, and I want it to come out the other side of the X right here. And there you go, just like that. So now, hopefully you guys could see that right there. Let me put it down for you. So now you can see this hook is at that 90-degree angle that you want with your hook. And now this lure is going to work just right. As the hook brings us down through the water column, it's going to have that flutter to it that just triggers so many fish to bite. By using 2 rings right there, making an X, as you can see right here, and you're going to save a lot of worms. Again, the Gary Yamamoto Senkos are pretty expensive, so if you could save a few just doing this, that is great. Now, a couple of things that you're going to hear on YouTube, which kind of makes me laugh, is you'll hear stuff like, well, don't use an O-ring because that black ring makes this bait look a little bit unnatural, and they're not going to bite it if it looks unnatural. And I just don't know where people get that from, because there's a giant hook attached to the worm. So, you know, the fish in the natural environment aren't used to seeing just hooks hanging out either, and they still attack the worm even if you put this hook through the worm itself. So that whole argument of like that ring doesn't look natural and that's going to cost you fish, I just don't see it, because this is literally attached to a giant hook that's then attached to fishing line, neither one of which fish really think is going to look natural like prey, but yet they eat it anyway. And all right, so next up, let's talk about the gear, and it could not be easier. Okay, spinning reels is going to be my recommendation for most fish-a-lots out there. There's a lot of beginner and intermediate fish-a-lots out there that just don't want to deal with the tangles of a baitcaster, so a spinning reel, especially for wacky rig fishing, is going to work perfectly. It's going to work just fine, so don't give yourself the headaches. Spinning reel is going to be great. If you do want to use a baitcaster, those stick baits do get pretty heavy. Like I said, a Yamamoto Senko is pretty heavy. It's very heavily salted, and so you will be able to cast with the baitcaster. So this is a 3,000 size reel. 2,500 size reels are perfectly fine too. I always recommend a 3,000 size reel. This way you don't find yourself out there buying a bunch of different reels for different fishing situations. 3,000 size reel holds plenty of line. You could take it offshore fishing with you, you know, for like striped bass, bluefish, fluke, that kind of thing. And of course it handles itself just fine for carp, catfish, largemouth bass, crappie, whatever. So this is 3,000 size reel is going to be the most versatile. That's what I recommend. For the rod, okay, if you're fishing in a kayak or from the bank, we have a lot of overhanging trees, or, you know, kayak fishing, you're kind of in close quarters, I'd recommend a fishing rod under 7 feet. A lot of people are recommending like 7/6 rods and 8-foot rods. And, you know, nothing's worse than you're trying to cast and you smash it into a tree above your head or into some brush, or you're on a kayak and you just don't have the room to maneuver. So under 7 feet, this rod right here, which I use for a lot of different fishing, you'll see in my videos, is 6/6. It's fantastic. This is a custom-made rod, but I'll put a link in the description below of some of the rods that I recommend and that I use and that you see on the channel. Of course, this is a Daiwa Fuego. I also really like the PC Fun spinning reels. Cast King makes some great spinning reels. You do not have to break the bank with this stuff. I think this entire setup cost me maybe 150 bucks or 200 bucks, something like that. Now for the line, I'm going to use 10-pound braid. I don't recommend using anything more than 10 pounds for any inshore fishing, because that low line diameter is going to allow you to present lures in a very natural way, and those fish cannot detect that light of line that easily, so it's going to trigger more bites. And of course, what I like to do is I like to put my braid onto a fluoro or mono leader, and I'm going to tell you why I use both actually here in a minute. And I like to tie that with an FG knot right here. So that's an FG. You can never even feel this thing go through your guides. It's absolutely fantastic. Strong knot. If you're not comfortable with an FG knot, there's always a double uni knot. Very easy knot to tie, very quick, very friendly knot for those not familiar with the FG. It's just a little bit thicker in diameter, but that knot will do you just fine. I use 8 or 10 pound fluoro or mono. I don't go any more than 10 pound for my leader. I like the line light. I like the low diameter. It gives you a lot of versatility with getting the lure down deep in the water column with lighter line. And you would be shocked if you're using 15 pound, 20 pound line, those lures are not going to get down nearly as deep as if you use lower diameter line like I have here. And again, you're going to be shocked at how light a line you could use in heavy cover and really pull some big fish out of it. A lot of people think if they're fishing around cover, they got to use 20 pound test line for a bass. You just don't. That's a huge misconception. That lighter line will trigger so many more bites because they're not going to detect the line as easily as big old thick line. Nothing really to it. I mean, a lot of times people like to overcomplicate this stuff. That's it. That's your gear. And all right, so next up, let's talk about the hook itself, right? So the hook is going to be a very important piece of this rig because, quite frankly, the hook is going to go into the fish, and that's how you're going to catch the fish. So first of all, these are owner hooks right here. These are owner Wacky rig hooks. This one's got weedless, a weed guard on there in case you're throwing this in very heavy color. This one does not. These are VMC Wacky rig hooks. I really like these as well. And there's just a ton of hooks out there that you could use. This one's just a classic straight shank J hook that we use, you know, for my high-low rigs and saltwater fishing. And you know what? This works really great. And these work really great. And other hooks will work really great. The thing that you have to pay attention to with your hooks fish a lot is this, the diameter of the hooks. You want some thick steel hooks and some heavy hooks. And the reason why you want thick steel hooks and not thin diameter hooks is because if you use a thin diameter hook and you hook it through this worm right here, that thin steel will just tear through this worm like nothing, and you're going to go through a ton of worms doing it that way, especially if you're skipping, especially if you're getting like some smaller fish. You're basically going to go through a worm of fish, and that's no good. Now, if your preference is to use a very thin wire hook, my recommendation then would be to use these O-rings that you see right here. So if you're using very thin hooks, stick them in that O-ring just like that, and you won't have a problem because it won't rip through the worm. Now, there's another advantage to using these heavier, thicker hooks, and that is the weight. I find that these hooks, these VMC hooks especially, you see they got this resin right here, this extra weight on top of the hook. It really drives this lure down into the water column really well without adding weight. So now I got to address something with the hooks and the worms right here. Well, a great way to bait these is literally right through the middle of the worm. Okay, so something just like this. Now, the thing is, if you get a bite, right, and this gets tore up a little bit, the best way to deal with this is just simply take the hook out and rebait it at a different section of the worm. So every time you catch a fish, you know, it's going to tear up that plastic just a little bit. Take the hook out and rebait it somewhere else in the worm. You do not have to get this directly center in the worm each and every time. It's okay if it's off center, left or right a little bit. The action that you're looking for is for that worm to dangle, and as it dangles, it's not going to do it that dramatically, of course, I'm in the air, but in the water, it's going to just kind of flex just like that and wobble, and that's what triggers a lot of bites on the way down. So for your hooks and for hooking it up, you know, a lot of people like using those O-rings, but, you know, just hooking it straight through the worm and just varying where you're hooking it every time you catch a fish could save you a ton of worms, and I really recommend it. So now I'm going to kind of wrap that gear and your lure selections all up here in one little package. So a lot of people will ask, do you weight your Wacky rig? And check this out. If you pick a bait like a Senko or a Sticko and you pick a good, heavy, solid hook, you know, a big diameter hook that's going to want to sink, and you combine that with a fluorocarbon leader, which is also going to want to sink. And for that leader, if you really want it to sink, make it a longer leader. You can make it 2 feet. You can make it 4 feet. Basically, for my leaders, I pick 14 inches and above. But that fluoro combined with that heavy hook, combined with a sinking salted bait, you will be shocked at how deep you could get these lures without weighting the baits. Now, if you really did want to weight the baits, there is Wacky Worm Hook Baits. This one right here is an XPX Wacky Worm Hook weighted bait. It's got the tungsten weight at the head there. And really, if you wanted to weight your hooks or you wanted to weight your wacky rigs and get them down, really, the only time I would really recommend doing that is if you absolutely know they were right on the bottom. If you know they're right on the bottom, yeah, take your bait, throw it out there, get it to the bottom as quick as possible, and get that bait in the strike zone for as long as possible. And so that way, a weighted hook or a weighted wacky worm presentation is going to do really, really well. But most of the time, I do want a bait to sink through the water column because I really am searching for that strike zone and what those fish prefer. Remember, those fish are going to change their preferences each and every day, and they might be suspended, they might be deep, they might be shallow. Not everybody has forward-facing sonar, right? You might be fishing from a bank, from your kayak, from wherever, and finding that strike zone is absolutely going to be key. And that's why you would use some of those techniques like fluorocarbon combined with a heavy hook, combined with a Senko. And all right, so now let's talk about the retrieves here. And this is another huge misconception about wacky rigs, is that this is only a finesse type of bait and you're only going to fish this in shallow water. You're going to target like bedding fish. By the way, I don't recommend targeting a fish if it's trying to make baby fish. My personal opinion is just let those fish make baby fish. But, you know, some people do like to fish that way. And if you do like to fish that way, then picking a lighter worm that's going to want to float is going to be key, because you're going to be fishing in some shallow water, depending on your water visibility. So what I like to do is there's a couple different retrieves. So the first retrieve people do is they throw it out and they'll lift the rod up, and then they'll just kind of let it slowly sink, and they'll watch that line on a slack line. And that type of presentation is where high vis line really comes into play, so you could see the line. Forget if the fish could see the line. The fish have something called lateral lines, and they can detect that line displacing water, so forget about that. You want to see the line because you'll see that line tick, you'll see that line swim off a little bit, you'll know that you're fishing in some deep water and it doesn't quite get the depth, it just stops. Those are all indications from line watching that you have a fish. And if you watch a lot of my videos, especially ultralight videos, which I do, I emphasize line watching all the time. That is a great skill to learn, fish-a-lots, if you really want to catch a lot of fish, is learning how to watch your line when you are fishing. So that's the first way, right? That is a finesse type of way to fish this, and that's the way that most people will fish and tell you to fish. But that's a finesse way. The problem with that is that it doesn't cover a lot of water. So if you're a beginner intermediate fish-a-lot out there and you're not used to finding these fish, you're going to want to cover a little more water with a wacky rig, and you absolutely can. So another retrieve that I like to do to cover water is I like to cast it out. I like to cast it in areas that I think fish are going to be at, of course, and then I'm going to let it sink in the water column, and then I'm going to jig it a little bit. You know, I'm a big fan of jigging. I jig just about everything. Striped bass, catfish, you know, bass, crappie, bluegill, you name it. So that lure, I'm going to cast that lure out into an area. I'm going to let it sink a little bit, and then I'm going to fish it almost like a jerk bait, but pretty quick. I'm going to go jerk, 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 and then I'm going to let it sit a little bit, then jerk, jerk, jerk. I'm going to let it sink a little bit, jerk, jerk, jerk. And I could cover a lot of water. I don't fish Senkos like a lot of other people do. So a lot of people, they'll kind of raise that rod tip up and let it drop, and raise it up and let the bait drop. And I really use this as a search bait. So I'm actually fishing, oh, there it is. See, plane comes together right there. I'm actually fishing this through the water column. Nice pickerel. Look at this. There we go, let's flip him up here. Don't shake my Senko off. Now, you can do this just under the water if you're fishing in very shallow water, and that is a super fun way to do it. Yeah, so you can cover a lot of water like that. Now, another way that I like to fish a wacky rig that I don't hear anybody talk about really is I like to fish it at depth and cover a lot of water. So again, if you take fluoro, a heavy hook, and a sinking Senko, you could really get that thing to depth without weighting it. And so what I like to do is now I like to cast it out, and I like to let it sink. And as it sinks, I'll jig it just a little bit, just to give it a little bit of motion on the way down, because I really want to identify that strike zone. So if I know it's sunk about 5 feet and I'm jigging it and a fish hits, well, that's telling me that those fish are suspended 5 feet below the water, right? Or maybe it's 5 feet off the bottom, depending on the depth that you're fishing. What I also like to do is once I get that thing to depth, again, that wacky rig can cover some water at depth pretty well. I'll let it sink. I'll let it sink almost to the bottom, and then I'll jig it just like a jerk bait. Jerk, 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 right? And then I'll let it sit. I'll make sure it gets back down in the water column. I'll do another quick 2 or 3 jerks. Reel up the slack as I'm doing it, right? So I'm jerk, jerk, jerk. I'm reeling it in. Jerk, jerk, jerk. I'm reeling it in. But I already got it to depth. So it's kind of coming through the water column like this. And then when I want to get back down, I just kill it. It'll sink back down. And oftentimes what you'll find is as that's coming through the water column at depth, those fish will be following it. And then as you kill it, it sinks down and it kind of does that vibrating we talked about, right? It kind of does this a little bit. I should have grabbed the white one. The ends of it will kind of shake as it goes down. That oftentimes will trigger bites. What else will trigger bites is as it goes down and then you quickly jerk it and it shoots it up away from the fish, that will trigger the bite as well. So those are 3 ways that I really like to fish them. 2 of those ways I fish more times than not, and that's covering a lot of water. And that's something that really doesn't get talked about enough when it comes to wacky rigs, is how fast you could really fish those things. So the wacky rig is something that can catch you fish absolutely everywhere. But click on this video right here if you want another technique that's just as effective, but going way, way overlooked out there for the new shiny thing on the shelf, and it's costing fish-a-lots a ton of fish. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you out there on the water. Thanks a lot, fish-a-lots.